Planning Commission. I'd like to welcome everyone back from summer break. I hope everyone had a nice summer. I'd like to start off with the approval of the minutes of the July 6, 2009 meeting. Our August meeting was postponed. Does anyone have any comments to the minutes of the July 6, 2009 meeting?
I have one comment, Mark. I think we should delete the line. This is under old business. Delete the line that says, at which time, before the chair called for a second, Mr. Ellinger seconded the motion. So John just spoke out of turn, and I think if we leave it in there, it implies that there was a second. I think it's better to just eliminate it, so it would read, Mr. McCone asked to rediscuss the drive-through ordinance and move to recommend the approval of the ordinance as written. And then it would start again with Mr. Curley advised and my reasoning for not accepting the second, or not asking for a second.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments on that? Is anyone in agreement of that change? Any other changes? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion that we approve the minutes with the change indicated.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. We'll move on. Next on the agenda is the recommendation to the Board of Commissioners regarding the ordinance amending Article 28, Wireless Communication Systems of the Code of Township of Radnor, revising sections 280-161 through 280-171. I believe Tom Glynn is here on behalf of the Cable Council, and he'll take it from there. Thank you.
And tonight we're going to try and clarify the mission that we got from the commissioners to revise the ordinance, and we've prepared a substantial presentation which I think will clarify all the questions that, or areas of concern that we thought you had at our last meeting. I would suggest if, after we go through this and we answer whatever questions you have, if there are open questions, that we get those in writing and then we can respond to those and get the issue done. So I'd like to introduce John Riley, who was on the subcommittee that we formed to deal with this issue, and John has prepared, I think, an excellent presentation. John?
Good evening. As Tom said, I think what we would like to do this evening is to provide a little bit of a background for how we're before you today, what the proposed amendments to the Wireless Communications Facility Code are, and then, to the best we can, answer questions that you have regarding what it all means, how it all works, and when the rubber meets the road, what it is that we'll be working with. In terms of the background of our assignment, we were asked by the commissioners to take a look at the wireless communication section of the code and propose updates to the relevant sections that govern wireless communication facilities. I don't want to get into too many acronyms, so I'm going to fight the temptation to say WCFs, but it's a long phrase, so I may lapse into that. We're here again after meeting with you earlier this summer, and we're back tonight to try to answer any outstanding questions you have and explain just what it is we're doing and how it would be beneficial. The assignment was to keep the code current. It wasn't necessarily to rewrite the applicable sections of the code. We used as a basis for our revisions what we've been seeing in this space in terms of applications coming before us, and also to the extent that our counsel in Washington, D.C. had comments on updates that would be implicated by changes in applicable law or other trends in the communications law. We tried to include those as well. I think it's also important to note that our job was not to rewrite this section of the code. The section of the code was adopted some time ago, and our task was to update it. That being said, it became clear in the course of our process and also in the course of the meeting with you in July that there are other issues and other procedures that perhaps would be wise or we would benefit from in including to any revisions to the code. Changes like process, changes like notice to adjoining landowners when, for instance, and I will get into obviously a lot of the meat of it a bit later, but for instance, if an application is in for a pole top unit in the right-of-way, what notice goes to affected neighbors? The answer to that question today is none. I don't know if that's the right answer, but that's a policy issue. And what we were looking to do was to update in fairly discrete, fairly narrowly tailored areas of the law. There are policy issues that, again, we will get to that might suggest that we go beyond that. But we were not tasked to just go wherever we wanted to go. But in the course of developing these changes, it is perhaps wise to look at a couple particular areas that could benefit the process of how these permits are applied for, reviewed, and approved by the township. Some quick background on the regulatory framework in which we operate and in which the township is asked to operate with respect to wireless communications facilities. As was noted earlier, the sections of the code are there, and there's an overarching body of federal law that needs to be considered, and that's the Telecommunications Act of 1996, as amended. Excuse me. The Telecommunications Act was adopted to prevent barriers to entry, if you will, to wireless communication facilities. It's also important to note that the Telecommunications Act does some very important things and some very relevant things in terms of constraining our ability to regulate to perhaps the degree we would like to wireless communications facilities. The statute's quite clear, and the opinions and decisions based on the statute are clear, that the Telecommunications Act preempts, in many respects, federal or local government's ability to regulate these services. That having been said, municipalities can regulate in certain narrow areas. The zoning requirements that are established are fine as long as they don't unreasonably discriminate against competitors. The zoning requirements cannot have the effect of, from a starting point, preventing a carrier to enter into Radnor and provide these services. Not that I think Radnor would ever would. If a proposed wireless communications facility satisfies the federal requirements with respect to radio frequencies and power levels, the local government cannot challenge the application on the basis that in some way or another these emissions would hazardize the public health. Again, the FCC and the Telecommunications Act has said if it meets our requirements, you're preempted from acting. So there are some strictures on the township's ability to act in this area that we need to be mindful of. It's also important to note what this section of the code is intended to do. It's providing wireless, excuse me, the ability to locate wireless facilities in various zoning districts within the township. That having been said, there's a distinct preference for putting these facilities on existing structures as opposed to building new structures. Structures can be buildings. They can be tall apartment buildings. They can be, in my instance, right down my street from where I live, on dormitory roofs. They can be, wherever the technical goal that's sought to be achieved by the wireless provider can be accommodated by affixing something to an existing structure. Co-location is something that we also hope to bring about through the code, because there's a concern about the proliferation of a lot of these antennas all over the township. So to the extent that more than one wireless provider can co-locate facilities at the same location, there's certainly the code is intended to encourage that sort of development. We want them to be safe. We want them not, to the extent that they can, not look like wireless communications facilities. The success of that is in the eye of the beholder. Obviously, sometimes it's a wireless communication facility. Other times, it blends in nicely or has been thought out and is not as conspicuous as others. The code also establishes requirements for facilities that are placed in the right-of-way, and the code, it perhaps goes without saying, is intended to foster compliance by the township with the Telecommunications Act. Before we get to questions, I believe you may have in your materials the correspondence from the Delaware County Planning Commission, which has approved these changes with approved these amendments, subject to a couple changes that are noted in their July 16 letter. And I'm sure as we go through questions, we can get into that. And let me just skip through that. And at this point, with that as some background, we stand ready for questions.
Really quick, just because I don't have it in my material, I wasn't here for the last meeting. I did not get a copy of that, the Planning Commission, Delaware County Planning Commission letter. Did anyone else on the board get a copy of it?
I did not.
Okay. Actually, if you could flip that back up just for a second,
Oh, okay.
if you wouldn't mind.
Now you're going to rely on my technical abilities. That could be a problem.
Really putting the pressure on you.
Bear with me for a sec here. Oh, wait a minute. I know what I can do here. Hold on. All right. And I don't know how legible that is for you. You've got the smaller monitors. I was of the understanding that the Planning Commission had received this letter. I apologize for not having provided it earlier. And I don't think I've... Dan, do you happen to have copies of that? Or, I mean, I don't think...
I think this is fine.
Yeah, that was forwarded. It came to me, and it was forwarded on to Matt Baumann. But
Okay.
We should have a copy of it in our files.
Okay.
And then what was the next letter, John? After this, there was a letter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the front page was the cover letter. That's the meat of
Okay.
what they had
Okay.
discussed.
But overall, they
Yeah, the primary changes that the Delaware County Planning Commission had relate, and I think this is where we circle back and start getting into the issue of process. The first question from the Planning Commission had to do with some uncertainty in their mind as they read the proposed amendments, that they couldn't really determine who was giving the final approval for the issuance of a permit or the approval of the construction of a facility. If the first and second page of their letter, and I'm sorry we have to do it this way, but it's what we've got, relates to I'm sorry, I can't. They don't have a section. They don't have a section reference. But their comment number one relates to who passes on final approval of a proposed wireless communications facility. Okay, I'm sorry. It's 28165. Let me bring that page up. Sorry, 28165. So this will be facilities within the right of way, and as is currently drafted. And we can get into process in a few minutes, but as currently drafted, a proposal for the construction of a wireless communication facility within the right-of-way would come to the Citizens Communication Council, and we would verify that the application meets the requirements of the code and then pass on it. What we typically would do is make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, and I don't know that we are proposing to do anything differently than that. Now, it's certainly open for question whether the amendment that you have before you makes that clear enough. but it was not our intention that the Citizens Communication Council be the final arbiter of whether a permit would be issued. Again, the Citizens Communication Council is an advisory board. We would make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, but the ultimate authority with respect to the issuance of that permit would rest with the Board of Commissioners. Again, larger policy and process questions. If there was an appetite for changing that, for making the issuance of that permit determinative at a lower level, or still have it come before the board, we don't have a strong feeling one way or another.
Does this language indicate what the Delaware County Planning Commission wanted, or does the language that we have before us? With the changes?
And again, I apologize for not having copies, and I think we were provided this letter by staff, but the recommendation is without specific wording suggestions, but the recommendation is to clarify.
They identified a concept, and so what we have before us then is just to examine that concept.
Well, I'm sorry, excuse me. Their comment was it's not clear who the final who the final decision maker is.
Well, they say as approved by the Radnor Township Board of Commissioners, Township Planning Commission, or Township Zoning Hearing Board, question mark. So they're questioning who is it.
Right.
But I think your revision or proposed amendment on 28165A, where it used to just say all zoning districts upon approval by Radnor Township, you've added the language after evaluation and recommendation by the Citizens Communications Council. Obviously makes it crystal clear that it goes through you guys upon your evaluation, your recommendation, or not a recommendation onto the township as a whole, the Board of Commissioners. Because Radnor, I'm assuming that Radnor Township earlier on, the definition of Radnor Township, I'm pretty sure it is defined as the Board of Commissioners of Radnor Township.
Right. So that, and if one was to read 28165A, the third and fourth sentences, particularly the ad that we made after evaluation and recommendation by the Citizens Communication Council, it's a recommendation that we make.
Okay.
And you know, I'm not going to parse the language with the Delaware County Planning Commission to suggest that perhaps maybe it wasn't as opaque as they read it to be, but Radnor Township, as defined, acting on a recommendation from the Citizens Communication Council. I think, you know, the intent of the process was to retain the character of the Citizens Communication Council as an advisory, as opposed to an adjudicative or decision-making body in that respect, at least as to matters that would bind the township.
Okay.
Going further into the Planning Commission letter, excuse me, I don't think they had a point with their second issue, third issue, and this gets to some technical wording issue relating to, first, the use of the term secondary use in the existing code, and whether that should be, I believe, conformed to the use or the terminology of accessory use as it appears to be used elsewhere in the code. So I don't think that was a potentially problematic change on their point, or excuse me, on our part. And then I think really in their conclusion language, let me bring that up for you, I apologize. In their conclusion language, the Delaware County Planning Commission talks about some more policy-related land use questions at the bottom of the page that's up on the screen currently, which relates to a point that I had made earlier about the propensity for the use of these pole top units to sprout like dandelions do in my yard. I don't know about your yards, but the propensity for these things to perhaps appear everywhere throughout the township is something that the Delaware County Planning Commission is encouraging us to be mindful of. And again, they don't recommend any particular action with respect to the application or the amendments. They don't recommend any language that we would perhaps use to address that. But as a more general, a more overarching policy point, they do draw our attention to the fact that these things could spring up in a lot of places where we might not expect them to, but also that the visual impact of that could be negative for the township.
Just really quickly,
Sure.
in what we just discussed with regard to, after evaluation recommendation by the Citizens Communication Council, that is limited to facilities within the right-of-way.
That's correct.
Section 28165. When we're in Section 28164, facilities outside the right-of-way,
Right.
obviously in the A, we're looking at attached wireless communications facilities, and then B, we're looking at wireless communications with support structures.
Right.
Which does put in the 28164B, it puts you into a special exception of the zoning hearing board.
Right.
In both of those, in A and B, is there a evaluation and recommendation before the wireless?
We're veering back into policy again and process.
I
think
whether there needs to be or not, I just
it's a
was
rather
curious.
informal process. I think that even those applications would come before us, but would we benefit from codifying that or making that clearer and building a procedure in? I think probably we would. But let's think of the sort of the two paths an application could travel down, which depend on whether it's inside or outside of the right-of-way. Let's deal with facilities outside of the right-of-way. Right now, the application is received, I would think, in community development, and it goes somewhere. Zoning hearing, it should go to zoning hearing based on perhaps the type of application it is. And let me just point out the significant difference between A and B. 164A type applications are applications for facilities that are fixed to another structure. 164B applications are towers, are monopoles, the things that perhaps you think of when you think a cell tower. We're talking a tower. We're talking either what is behind this building here. We're talking about what's at Radnor Valley. It's a structure of that sort, freestanding and created solely for the purpose of supporting the location of wireless
But in that
communication.
structure, that's going before the zoning hearing board
That's
on a
correct.
special exception.
That's
But on
correct.
the A, the 28164, where it's an attached structure, that is literally an as-of-right permit-based.
Interestingly, that was also the other. I'm sorry I didn't touch on that earlier. That was the other part of the question that the Delaware County Planning Commission had with respect to that section. They suggested that we clarify whether it is as of right or whether it's a special exception. We don't take a position one way or the other on that. Certainly, I think given the location of where that wireless communication facility would be, might mitigate toward the same procedure as a tower. Just because it's not in the right-of-way, it's on private as opposed to public or public-controlled property. But whether that's by right or by special exception, I don't think we take a position on that. But I think the Delaware County Planning Commission would encourage us to come down one way or the other on that.
Do you review applications now for anything that comes through wireless, whether it's under 280, under the existing ordinance, forget
Right.
the amendments, under the existing
Right.
28164, under A or B, do you review them and
Yeah,
get a chance to look at that? I'm just, under our current policy, I know it's not codified, but
Right.
under our current
We-
policy.
Under the informal policy that's in place, they do come before us. And if one were to take a step back and perhaps suggest a process that makes some sense, perhaps the Citizens Communications Council is the first place they should come just because of certain of the technical requirements. And then it goes on to wherever it goes on. And you'll also note that in the code there is a provision for review of applications by the Design Review Board as well.
How many applications a year would come before you?
I don't know, we've had, what, half a dozen to date?
Yeah, I mean,
This is trying to anticipate growth,
Right.
not only in cell, but in technology we don't even know about yet.
yeah. And I don't want to anticipate questions that you have too much. But when you consider the issue of perhaps providing coverage in locations within the township that currently have spotty or no coverage, that's going to be filled in by either a very large tower, or perhaps facilities within the right-of-way or wherever else they're permitted to be placed. So we anticipate that there will be more applications, particularly, and I think the Delaware County Planning Commission confirmed this point as well. There will be more applications of the pole top unit variety, just because there's a natural. People don't like towers. Wherever you put them, people are not terribly sanguine about the prospect of having a tower, in or near where they are. So the pole top units are the second second approach.
Just a point.
Tom, you might have to speak into the mic.
I think it's important to understand that we can't compel any cell phone companies to cover a dead area, so everybody understands that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks for bringing that up. This is the Telecommunications Act. One of the other things that it does, it creates, in many respects, with respect to wireless communications facilities, a market-driven scenario. The market responds to where customers are, where customers want to be, where customers complain about their service. The Citizens Communications Council wears two hats. In our capacity of governing the provision of cable television in the township, we have the ability to point to Verizon or point to Comcast and come in and say, we're having these problems, consider doing this, consider doing that. The township has a contract with those folks, and the township has rights under those contracts that, to more or less an extent, we're able to call upon when we want to try to encourage a provider to do something. It's a different game as it relates to wireless communications facilities. Right now, it's a permit or we've got one tower, but permits are issued, but we don't have Sprint or Verizon or T-Mobile or anyone that we can pull in and say, you need to be doing this, that, or the other to provide service in areas where it's spotty or it's non-existent or it's not to the liking of the customers in that area. It's up to the customers, or it's up to the companies to see a competitive advantage to provide coverage in difficult locations. But the township cannot compel universal service as much as we might wish we could.
With regard to the amendments that you're proposing, procedurally, I'm just going to try to keep in the topics. Is there any other subject that you want to touch on in that broad topic? No. I mean, again, I think I want to express, and I know that Tom and Art agree here. I mean, we want to be quite clear that we're willing to make whatever changes that folks consider helpful in terms of these amendments, whether it be tweaking existing changes or heading into other areas that weren't in the original mandate, but certainly compel our attention, just given the process, given some of the uncertainty perhaps that we run into in this area. But we didn't see it as our job to expand our assignment. Okay. We're happy to do that. We're happy to commit whatever time and effort to that process that would be required. But we didn't want to do it sua sponte, so to speak. Does anyone else on the commission have a comment regarding process? Just trying to keep it within.
Yeah, just following on what you just said. Is this ordinance, is it foreseeing any particular permit or application that's coming into the township that could have some impact on neighboring properties or any variance to height or location or anything like that? I mean, this is...
Yeah, Matt, that's a good question. Our assignment, I think, was originally given to us at the beginning of this year, I think without respect to any consideration of what might be in a pipeline somewhere. So the answer is no, there was nothing particularly in mind that we were trying to address or anticipate by these changes. The hope is that the changes that we would propose would be of general application and of benefit and improvement, but not with respect to anything that might be out there in the offing.
And the only reason I bring it up is we had a similar discussion a few months ago about billboards and how that could potentially impact some of the neighborhoods in the township, and I don't think anybody on the board really thought it through until it came before us, but okay, that answers the question.
No, and it's interesting you bring up that discussion because I had that in my mind as we were working through this process. If, again, there's a distinction between facilities that are inside and outside the right-of-way. Facilities that are outside of the right-of-way, it was noted at the July meeting, there's a wider set of zoning classifications in which those facilities could be located. And I think as a practical matter, one of the reasons that they were probably broadened in terms of the available zoning classifications was just the concern that in some way or another we were impermissibly preventing the location of these facilities in a residential zoning district. So R5 is there for facilities that are outside the right-of-way. It makes very good technical sense to have R5 be a location for those sorts of facilities if you're talking about the Chetwynd, my age, the Radnor House, or some of the other larger apartment buildings. I mean, the carriers are looking for height. So a large condominium or office building or apartment building would suit their purpose, and it gave presumably the township the ability to say we've also included provision for placement of these facilities in a residential zone. So please don't come and complain to us that somehow we're discriminating or being impermissibly exclusive in terms of the requirements of the Telecommunications Act.
Well, I question then. If your focus was the height, why didn't you specify in all residential zoning areas and buildings of specific heights or higher?
Okay, can
Rather
you
than
hold
R5.
Let me, Doug, good question, but can you hold it for just a moment?
Yes.
I really want to stick to process and going through the process of permitting right now. And I really just because that was kind of, and I just want to make sure, let's go step by step here so we don't mix it up.
So if you were to add the requirement to sort of codify the informal policy of coming through the Citizens Cable Council, Communications Council for applications that are outside the right-of-way, do you think it would direct providers to use micro towers or macro towers? Would it influence the type of tower that resulted?
I'm speaking only for myself, but I wouldn't expect the process to drive what type of application we would get.
Very good.
I think the market's going to drive the application.
I understand. And then would you say that it's not burdensome? It's a large provider coming a handful of times, so it's not like it's going to delay the process terribly much if we codified the informal process. Is that correct?
Well, we're not the burdened party, but appearing before 3 boards, for instance, say an application had to come before us, before zoning hearing, before design review. I can't tell you what would be burdensome for them. I don't think that's impermissibly burdensome, and they're in business, and that's part of what they need.
It's the sort of thing they would come through once, they'd build a structure, and it would last for a couple of decades. It's not like they would have to come through a lot, correct?
Well, that would depend on the type of structure that you're talking about. I mean, if we were talking about a 120-foot tower, that would be one use. If we're talking about affixing an antenna to a tall building, that would be something different. I think the coverage area is different. The ability for the carrier to send its signal out differs depending on the type of structure that it's affixed to. Obviously, if you're attaching a wireless communication facility to a wall of a building, you are limiting yourself directionally. Whereas if you were to construct a large tower and could put antenna around, the perimeter of that tower, you would have a much greater ability to fill in gaps in coverage. So I think in that respect, I would certainly think that a carrier that was successful in submitting an application for a large tower would be sated for a while in terms of satisfying their need to get their signal out. If it's one wireless communication facility in one discrete location, I would anticipate that they would be back because there's only so much coverage they can generate out of a smaller unit versus a much larger structure.
Just one point. We tried to talk to the communications companies about what their future plans were to get some sense of order of magnitude. They don't know, and they don't want to talk about it. And so they may come time and time again, or they may come with a grand plan. We've opened the door for them to come with a grand plan if they have one, but to date, they don't.
Yeah, and I don't want to anticipate topics. We'll get to coverage issues because I suspect we'll have the chance to get to them.
Is there anyone else with regard to process?
So are we saying that we feel that everything should go through their board? Whether it's 164 or 165?
I think that's somewhat of the sentiment that I'm getting from some of the questions.
I think we should decide.
Okay.
But
It kind of reminds me of shade tree and saying, well, some trees have to go through and some trees don't. We would never do that. So why would we want, we have this group and this is your function, why wouldn't we just want everything to go there first?
And on an informal level, you have been looking at everything. It's just not
Yeah,
codified.
yeah,
I think we need to,
Yeah.
because we're looking at a growth
Yeah.
area that could have a potential adverse impact visually, aesthetically for the township, and we're looking at it expanding possibly immensely over the next few decades.
Well,
Let's
Julie,
not
I
hope
agree with you.
immensely.
I think we
Julie, I
need-
agree with you. It's a growth area. It is definitely a growth area, and let's be ahead of the curve and have it in our code rather than behind the curve trying to
And
force
also,
them
we
in.
don't want to be confusing. We want to streamline the process so that everybody knows where they stand.
Okay. Well, we can bring that up down the road and bring that into our recommendation. Why don't we move on to anything you need to address, or we can move on away from process and open up the floor to other questions from the commission?
All right, I'm an engineer by trade, so I'll go back and do it. I was going to pass these along, just take one and pass it along. First of all, why are 120-foot towers highly desirable from a technical perspective?
Well, I think as a practical matter, the higher the antennas are, the broader the ability to spread the signal out across the land that's under them. 120 is the height that was in the code as we found it. There's nothing that we have seen that would compel a change in that height. We have seen applications for pole top units at 50 feet, 60, 70, 80. I think if they could find a telephone pole that was 120 feet, they might try it. But I think as it relates to them sending the signal out, higher is better. But is 120 better than a higher 150? I don't know that, but 120 is what was in the existing code.
All right, what is the ideal size of, well, first of all, we're talking about cells, and the cells are where the base stations are located, and with each base station, you basically get a cell around it. One of the problems that we have is that within a certain base station or a particular cell, there are only so many communication channels that you can have. Is that correct? There's a limit to them. I don't know exactly what it is. Someone I was talking to today said it was a couple hundred, whatever. But one of the trends, as I understand it, in the telecommunications, especially in densely populated areas, is to take the cells and break them into smaller cells, not bigger ones. And the reason for that is that if you only have a limited number of calls capable in a given cell, by creating more cells, you create more cells. Now, that means you create more communications channels. And so the effect is to take a cell, like if you have the tall cell towers and you have maybe a 5-mile radius cell. If you're out in the middle of Kansas or Texas or someplace where the population's really low and you've only got a few people who use it, you're not going to have a kind of a problem. You put that in the center of Manhattan, you're done, you know. And one of the things that they do is they start shrinking the size of the cells and make them micro cells is one of the terminologies that they use. And part of the advantage of that is that not only can you not broadcast extremely far distances, because if you do that, then you're going to cross into other cell territories and
Using
start
the same,
interfering. You don't want necessarily to do that, so that the high power and high location becomes a less desirable thing. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. Issues of crosstalk and other issues will come up because of that sort of an issue.
All right. We're on right now appear to be. My understanding is that the trend in the industry is towards a lot of smaller cells rather than bigger ones. Now, granted, there's every cell has the cost of putting in a base station, putting in the antennas, and all the rest of that stuff, connection to the system, and that's costing big bucks. So, of course, the companies are much more inclined to put in one base station than others. But if we're looking down the long term, if we're looking at the, I mean, 3 years ago, I'm the only one in my family that had a cell phone that was provided to me by my employer. Now all of my kids and my wife have one, and there are a couple lying around the house, you know, and this is the trend. Should we not be anticipating having those kinds of things?
Well, I think that part of what we're doing is, in fact, anticipating it, but the code as we currently find it provides carriers the ability to install those types of antenna. And in fact, the most recent ones that we've seen from T-Mobile are just that. I mean, they're microcell antennas at discrete locations. That's likely to increase and continue as carriers look to fill in their gaps, and carriers to a larger or a smaller extent view their true coverage maps as something of a proprietary asset. For obvious reasons. But, the fact that we see certain carriers coming back over and over again tells you that either they're very active in filling those gaps, or they just have figured something out better than than another of the carriers. But I would fully expect that type of an application for a microcell application will continue in the future. There's nothing in the existing code that would preclude that from happening or impermissibly prevent them from making an application and installing that kind of a facility. And in large part, I don't think too many of our changes, if any of the changes really substantively go to that point, just because we've seen the code as permitting that kind of an application today.
Okay, and I'm asking a question from more of a technical policy perspective. Would we as a township be in better position if what we do is actually set up the ordinance to encourage those kind of microcell types of things as opposed to the big tall towers and stuff like that? I mean,
two-part answer. One, generally that kind of a question is above my pay grade. Secondly, that is, and this was alluded to in your July meeting, you're trading, you're making decisions, you're trading off quality of service versus proliferation of these types of antennas. Somebody has to make those policy decisions. We're certainly happy to weigh in on them. I don't think we as a communications council have taken a position one way or the other as to whether we should do something to encourage versus discourage any sort of a coverage. Again, our task with the Telecommunications Act hanging over our head is to make the township available for services that carriers might wish to provide. We can't get too much in the way of that, but the market is going to go where it goes. And I think in terms of this code's responsibility under the Telecommunications Act, it's doing what it needs to do.
And when you look at your revisions on 28164A, previously you were allowed attached wireless communication facilities located on any parcel or tract of land shall not exceed the height of the building or structure by more than 15 feet. So basically, in all R5, C2, C3, PB, PLO, and PI zoning, anyone could put or seek to put a wireless communication facility on their property, whether that be in theory, a two-story home or the Chetwynd, which same thing as you, I've been here too long, facility. But in the current, you've taken that ability out because you've limited it to, they can't put attachment structures or support structures for at least 60, they have to be at least 60 feet in height, and then they can't extend over 120 feet in height. So you've put some severe limitations on what buildings in our township they can actually go on.
Yeah, and a couple thoughts on that. The first of which is, in terms of bang for the carrier's buck, they're going to look to put it on higher rather than lower facilities. So while technically correct that on the top of my two-story house, I could put a wireless communications facility. Currently. As a practical matter, that's not going to get done technically what the carrier is going to want to do. There might be unique locations. There might be a particularly greasy wheel in a particular area that has called customer service at a carrier so frequently that they say, fine, we'll slap one on that block and one problem is removed. But again, as the difference between the language and the practical application of how these are constructed is going to have carriers looking for higher rather than shorter locations.
And 60 feet, I'm sorry, and 60 feet is approximately, Dan, quick question for you. 5-story building, 6-story building? A 60 feet in height of a building is usually what? How many stories? 5 to 6. Okay.
So practically speaking, apartment buildings, office buildings, Villanova dormitories. One thing that I thought of this afternoon, and I'm happy to hear thoughts on this. I don't know how obviously the Wayne Business Overlay District was enacted after the enactment of this code. And I have reason to believe there's a tower in the Wayne Business Overlay District that is very tall and has a lot of communications facilities. And we have not provided for that zoning district in this code. So we might. Where is it? Where is it?
Yeah, the suspense is killing us.
Look up.
It happened to be big and brick.
Yeah. So I mean that's one change that jumps out. But
now a question for you. Obviously, the FCC has very great concerns on discriminatory and being too selective. Although I'm in favor of this limitation being, keeping it off of people's rooftop units here, does that, according to council, does that comport with the FCC regulations? I mean, we're good with non-discrimination.
We got no pushback from our council in D.C. with respect to that change. I never like to speak for another lawyer, but I think that passed whatever test that they had for that.
Are the numbers fairly standard? Were they taken from someone else's language or from standard language issued by the FCC? So specifically the 120, the 40%, the 60? Numbers,
well, the 120 is not an accident since that's really the limit for a freestanding structure in 164B. So that language adopted the height limitation of 120 feet that was already in place for freestanding structures. The remainder
are these standard height? Like, are we the first township to have these heights, or is this?
I have not done a survey of other townships' relevant statutes to be able to answer that question. This was not taken from a standard recommendation that either the FCC would put out or other sort of publicly accepted source materials that would suggest that ratio or that height.
Yeah, another question for you. If the maximum height of a building in the township is 120 feet, which is I think what you just said.
Well, no, what I'm saying is the 120 feet that is in 164A and 164, well, the 120 feet was in the 164B provision, and we just adopted it for the 164A provision.
Okay, got it.
Question for you on the 164B provision, adding planned institutional. We already have planned institutional on the attachment, on the wire, on the attached wireless communications facilities. And then on the support structures in the B section, we've added planned institutional. Planned institutional, as I understand in our township, Dan, is mainly the universities and the other college campus type places around here. What is why would you add planned institutional? I mean, in the B, since they already have the ability in the A to put it on their dormitories, put it on their steeples or wherever they might be able to put it.
It really was a concession to making different zoning classifications available to carriers. We did, your zoning map is larger than my zoning map, but we did take a look at the zoning map. And again, I mean, there are various other hoops that a support structure under 164B will need to make its way through. But we took a look at the zoning map with an eye towards, are there other ways of making areas available so that if gaps in coverage needed to be filled in, they might be able to do that one way or another way. We took a look at the zoning map, made a determination, and certainly we'd be happy to hear comment on it, that planned institutional might be another classification that would properly support the installation of a support structure, a tower, a monopole, within the township. And again, remembering that they can really accomplish more with a big tower than the attached wireless communication facilities in many instances. The thinking was that would help them fill gaps, make the township more accessible to them.
If we were to reduce the maximum height from, say, 120 down to, say, 60, unless we had some kind of special exception type of thing to put that in, what would the effect be on the companies that would have to provide the services?
I think as a practical matter, you're going to see a lot more applications for microcell, pole top, and similar units, because they'll want to go certainly to that limit. We have seen applications where we've asked the question on for instance, a 70-foot, 65 or 70-foot application, can you achieve your engineering goal with 60? And they constantly want to go higher. So every application we see, almost every application, let me revise that, is in excess of 60 feet. Is 80 the number? That could be. I mean, that could be.
How tall are you normally is a monopole type tower, antenna, whatever?
It depends on a number of issues, most particularly where that pole is located and the topography of the land around it. Because you also have co-location on the higher pole. Well, that's right. Thanks. Art points out also that on higher towers, it is easier to co-locate than on a 60-foot tower. You're not going to co-locate on a 60-foot tower because the carriers need a 15-foot gap between antennas in order to co-locate because of interference and other issues. So no one's going to want a 45-foot antenna. Everyone will want to be at 60. That's why we see applications for 80 and beyond, because the requirements that are inherent in a co-location type application just dictates toward a higher height. But getting back to your earlier question, a lot of it is topography. If they're at the, if it's a 60-foot pole top installation at the top of a hill, 60 might get them what they need. Whereas if it's in an area that has heavy trees, has valleys, I'm sorry, Mr. Ellinger isn't here, the Northwoods issue, a 60-foot pole, depending on where that is, might not do anything for them, because one of the things that they really seek to achieve in the applications is to get above the tree line. Because if you're bouncing off the trees, your signal is weakened and your coverage is lessened. So they want to sort of look at where the pole is going, look at the surrounding topography, and then say, okay, does it get above the noise that is the tree cover, and can we get the signal out? So it really, the height is all over the height of the application is all over the place, depending on where they want to put it.
Can you compensate for the trees, the leaves, and branches and so forth like that?
What do you mean? What do you mean compensate? I have a chainsaw at home, but
cute.
Right. What kind of a tree are we talking about?
No, I was talking with someone who has been teaching this stuff for 20-some years. He said that by and large, you can compensate for that by increasing the power of the station. Granted, you're going to pay a little more, electrical costs, but you would still be able to do it even below the tree line. Right?
And some of the business decisions that the applicants make before they get to us
are those decisions.
Are those types of decisions. I'm sure if they could park a Cadillac everywhere, and there was no economic difference to them, they would. But again, just as we balance how much proliferation of these units we're going to endure, they make a decision of how many they can afford to put up and what makes an economic bargain, economic sense for them.
So a similar question to Doug's then, and I'm just sort of interpreting what, or how I interpreted your response earlier. We don't know whether the industry would want to gravitate toward macro structures or micro structures. That remains to be seen. We don't know what their preference is.
I think if it were strictly a technical question, the township might be littered with large towers. Mm-hmm. But I think they also understand that it's not always as easy an issue as making an application for a large tower.
Is it fair to say that they really can't use the existing poles, that they're just too small, that when they come in, they're going to want to build, even the micro towers are going to be higher than the traditional utility
and when
pole
you
that we see?
when you say the existing utility poles, again, with the caveat that it might depend on the location, but the applications that we have seen have called for the replacement of existing poles with higher poles.
And so then is it fair to say that what we're choosing between is taller poles, but just how tall they should be? I mean, they're going to come to us and they're going to say we need taller poles, and we're going to choose, 60 being the low end of the range and 120 being the high end of the range.
Yeah, and well, yes, I think that's right. But I think the 60 and are you looking at 164A
I'm sort of just
at this
speaking
point?
in general at this point, trying to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. That again, depending on particular instances and particular cases, I think that's a range that we have seen in our applications. So I would expect to continue to see that.
I have a question for you. With regard to, we're going to jump off 64A and B now. We're going to move to E. And basically, when I look at E, it's the alternative locations for wireless communications. And I see your changes are really in E5, which is just the property owner will now incur cost, fees, and contractual provisions. And then 8, you basically beef up the requirements, the hoops that the applicant has to jump through for the E. I guess my question on E in general, and again, this is to either three of you gentlemen, has that come before us, and what is that designed for? I mean, I'm not a wireless communication guy.
Okay.
I pick my cell phone up if I can't get reception, I throw it out the window. I mean, but when I look at E, it seems like this is an all-encompassing fallback that allows them, if they can't find, if they have good reason to, they can put basically, and this is part of our code right now, just so everyone understands that. This is in our code, and you've actually beefed it up to make it harder, but it's a provision that basically says if they can't find somewhere under A and B, and they can meet these requirements, well, they can put it, in theory, anywhere.
Well,
has that come before the township before? Has it come before you guys in any regard?
Yeah. No, I've not seen it. It should be noted that the addition in subsection 8 to that section was recommended by our Communications Council in D.C. Yes.
E8, 164E8. It basically adds to the requirements that the applicant demonstrates that there are no suitable alternative locations or technologies, and that absent the requested new support structure and location requested, a denial of the application would have the effect of prohibiting the provision of wireless communication.
Yeah, if you think about the language, it gives and it takes away at the same time. The second section, or the second part of that clause is, again, directed at compliance with the Telecommunications Act. But we are permitted to say that you've got to show that there are no other practical approaches or locations, and obviously 1 through 7 is the waterfall, if you will, that they need to cascade down to get to 8. So it's a high standard, but remember also that this section 8 only talks about alternative locations for wireless communications with support structures. That's a tower. Yeah. That's a monopole. That's not affixing an antenna to a side of a building. So those types of structures are treated differently and with great care in this code, because it's clear to me that a policy determination was made at the time of the adoption of this code that they need to be treated differently. And it is permissible to treat them differently under the Telecommunications Act. And again, the impact on the township of a monopole, or imagine the tower just outside this building springing up in 5 or 6 or 7 other locations in the township. I think people might have concerns with that. I mean, the monopole on Radnor Valley, it's there. It's near the Blue Route. It's back a ways and is, I guess, as inconspicuous as a structure of that sort can be. But again, the policy inherent in this particular treatment is pretty clear that they're special structures. They need to be thought of, very differently and with great care.
With regard to that, it talks about there are no suitable alternative locations or whatever else. Does that apply not just to the, what if there was a technology that will work but it's really expensive? Does that make it unsuitable?
Yes.
That would make it unsuitable?
I think so, under the code.
Well, I'm not, I don't want to, I think it would be wise not to prejudge applications that we've not received and put ourselves in a box in terms of suitability.
I'm sure there's many judges out there that have written many opinions opining on what suitable alternative locations and technologies are. The only thing I would add to Doug is with that, just to even add a little bit more teeth, rather than use the word or on no suitable alternative locations, I would use and. So that it would read something like, applicant demonstrates that there are no suitable alternative locations and technologies. So therefore, any applicant coming forward is going to have to prove both no suitable alternative locations and that the technology isn't there either. I think that's just, I mean, again, that's for the rest of this commission to look at, but that would be one thing that I just see in there.
But while we're in that section, in number 5, I'm concerned that that's too restrictive, because they're saying that no new structures will be permitted. unless these things can be met, and one of them is that the cost exceeds the new construction for a support structure at the bottom of 5. And I realize that's in our existing code now, and that's not one of the amendments that you're proposing, but it seems to work against our desire to encourage co-location.
That may be the case, but we are not in the, we don't have the ability to require a private property owner to accept less for the use of his or her or its asset. We can't, if someone is holding another carrier up for an unreasonable fee to co-locate, unfortunately, we can't do anything to compel the existing owner to lower its price. We're not, excuse me. Yeah, we don't have, I don't know that we'd even want that sort of power, but we don't have that power. And it could well be that you're exactly right.
But I just think that you've set a price here. You're saying we can't set the price, but you have set the price. The price is whatever the new construction cost of a support structure is. Mm-hmm. That's us saying what the price,
Well, that's telling them that price is unreasonable. And again, this is a circumstance where we're talking about a co-location, and the cost to co-locate versus the cost to construct a new tower is significantly different. It's significantly more expensive to construct a new tower than it is to co-locate. So this really would be an instance where if I'm a carrier that wants to provide a service from that location.
This would be protection from highly inflated costs, is what you're saying. If I can't strike a deal with someone in a great location, I shouldn't, because of that, be precluded from looking to provide my service somewhere else.
I think just looking through this altogether, and this is just my review of this, I think we've touched on all the substantive areas that have been changed. There's a lot of different changes that are very minute, like are to is and everything like that. But I think the overall gist from the really teeth of this is the 280-164A, the 60 feet minimum, 120 maximum with 40% height, the planned institutional in the 164B, the 164E5 and E8 that we just discussed, and then the 165A, the review by the Citizens Communication Council. And I believe when you're really looking at substantive changes to this, and there's some legal changes that I understand, which is the severability and the repealer functions. I think those are the main areas, and I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that, or would you agree with that?
I think that's
right. That's not to mitigate all the work you've done on the other sections.
I'm particularly pleased with my repealer. No, that's right. In the areas where we've made changes, I think that's the meat of it.
Under facilities in the right-of-way, what are the height? What's the height restriction there?
I think it's 120. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think we intended to change that. But Dan, do you know what the maximum height would be for a facility in the right-of-way?
I don't think we have any language that restricts the height of anything that's in the right-of-way.
So the telephone poles are in the right-of-way, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Right. And then, so they could replace the existing telephone pole with a 120-foot telephone pole? Anywhere? In the right-of-way?
In theory, yes, that's correct. Now, the question becomes, now let's take a step back and look at larger policy issues, which is, again, not technically what we did. Might it make sense to do something in that area? I could see doing something in that area. And some other things as they relate to facilities within the right-of-way. But we're open to suggestion on that.
Now, a right-of-way, Dan, includes any public street and back. I mean, I own in the middle of the street, but actually the right-of-way includes the sidewalk in front of my house. Is that right?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, so that nobody's going to put one of those in the middle of North Wayne. But there are sections of the township where you might have large open areas, grass lawns and so forth, where people might be a little displeased if you put even a 60-foot or a 50-foot tower.
Right.
And in the right-of-way, I mean,
Sure.
this doesn't seem to provide much in the way of public input.
Well,
it is processed.
But think about, though, how other users gain the right to do things in the right-of-way. They do that through an agreement with the township. T-Mobile doesn't have the right and I was thinking of this as it relates to sections in the township where there are buried utilities, because concerns were expressed at the last meeting that a question similar to that, in a location where there are buried facilities, could a carrier come in and put a pole in the right-of-way and go on? Yeah, and you re-asked it sort of today. Think about how other users get the ability to use the right-of-way. They do that through an agreement with the local government. So there would be a process for gaining that right to use the right-of-way. The applications that we have seen have been, let's take a step back, you're putting a pole-top unit on a Pico pole. Well, Pico already has the right to use that right-of-way in the provision of its services. And T-Mobile strikes a deal with Pico that they are permitted to place their facilities on top of Pico poles. So their ability to get to the right-of-way is through a permitted user of that right-of-way today. If you have a right-of-way that has no improvements, has no poles, no utility facilities of any kind, that user is going to have to come through the township to get some right to do something within that right-of-way.
And with Pico, is there a limit? Do they have a height limit existing?
I'm not aware of any. That's a little bit beyond me. But
Yeah, part of the problem is a typical telephone pole is 35 feet, and that's the way they always were. Now we see that has changed because they can sell their poles and make additional funds. So that's why there's never been any kind of a height restriction in the right-of-way, because it was never an issue.
And to me, that seems like a bigger issue than one that, out of right-of-way. What ability we have to limit the height in the right-of-way?
it could. I agree, it's an issue, and in some respects, in many respects, I'm not sure that we have an answer for that, other than considering how Pico would permit their access to the right-of-way being used. I don't know how excited Pico would be in generating revenue not related to their core business if they started allowing T-Mobile in jurisdictions that would allow it to construct 100-foot telephone poles. I think that could be problematic. I think the township at that point, again, might look at whether Pico is properly using its right to use that right-of-way, because Pico is under an agreement to use that right-of-way the same way as other users of the right-of-way would be. At some point, their use of that right-of-way would become unreasonable. So is that an adequate check on the possibility that larger and larger and larger poles are put up? Again, I think a lot of people are thinking about these issues, for the first time as we see more and more of these applications. It's a great question.
Do we have any authority to limit the height of any pole in the right-of-way? Do you know, or Dan, do you know? Or does that fall outside our, even if we decide we wanted to do it, would we have the authority to do it?
I would think we have the right to do that.
And we, you mean the township?
Yes, the
Okay.
township.
I mean, the sovereign can
It would seem to me if we're going toward proliferation of smaller cells and more of them, that the quickest and easiest way to get those cells out is along the existing right-of-way on the telephone poles. They could cut a deal with Pico, one fell swoop, and, put up, I don't know, 5,000 poles in the township, cells in the township with one deal with Pico and be done with it. And if we're spending all this time and effort and energy trying to protect ourselves from that, we got to find another method, because it doesn't seem like we've.
Yeah, I think we're protected by the economic reality that they wouldn't need necessarily to do that. I mean, these poles, these antennae come with costs, and we've not seen applications for hundreds of these, even though there are spotty coverage areas and gaps in coverage today. We've not seen a wave of these types of applications to date. So, the tsunami of pole top units is probably not as likely an outcome as an increasing number. But again, the township is fairly well built out from what we can determine to date in terms of coverage. All carriers have their dead spots, and we learn of those as they come to us with an application to address one of those issues. My sense, though, is that the economic reality is going to preclude them from just blanketing the township with antennas, where they can do it with fewer locations.
Again, my concern there again is just, we don't know what the technology's going. We're trying to get ahead of the curve.
Sure.
We want to protect ourselves, because they could develop a better technology where maybe they just boost signals and, put 40 foot on top of 40 or 50 foot, and they're boosting the signal somehow. I mean, I'm not a technical, I don't know, but I just think we've got a huge hole here in our coverage. And, if we can address it, maybe we don't address it here, but maybe through the township. If we address it, then we're covered. If we don't address it, then we're just exposed.
Yeah,
and it may not be an issue. I don't know.
Yeah, and as I said, to the extent that this body thought that specific changes to the amendments were warranted, we're certainly happy to entertain those.
And I think it's an issue. I think it should be either addressed or identified as something that we should address. I don't know that we need to address it now, but I see the same issue, and why not address it if we have the authority?
I just following on what Steve was saying, if we see obvious intent to bring towers to places like Ithan Valley Park and the Willows public parks, those are less densely developed areas of the township to begin with. That's probably why they want to build such high towers. I mean, maybe if we had some restrictions on certain public spaces or open spaces, that would force a different technology in those areas, and particularly around the Androssan and Willow's view sheds. I think that would be completely inconsistent with what the township has done at the Willows to put a tower behind the mansion. I mean, that's my opinion, but that just doesn't seem in keeping with what the township's trying to do out there. So I'm wondering if there's a way to preclude development of towers on that large scale within public parks and certain view sheds.
And that is a specific question that I would not want to get into without checking with our communications council, because obviously by exclusion of certain residential zoning districts, we've eliminated areas from the construction of these facilities. Whether we need to go beyond that as it would relate to particular public use areas, we can certainly ask that question of our council in D.C.
With respect, okay, I noticed that in 28164B, it specifically includes public land use, PLU, which would include the skunk pile. I had made my notes coming in here that I would like to see that removed if we could. That doesn't mean that I'm saying we can't provide coverage in those areas, but it would seem to me that 2 or 3 or 4, say, lower antennas or something along Newtown Road or in areas around that might be a better solution, which, again, aesthetics play a big part in why people live here, and especially in those areas like that. I mean, my wife was shocked that she could, be within 15 miles of City Hall in Philadelphia, and there's a farm with pigs and cows and stuff. Okay. So people want to maintain that kind of stuff, and a tall cell tower is not necessarily consistent with that, to put it nicely.
Are you asking about the PLU? I'm sorry.
Yeah, but along those lines with PLU and with Matt's concern, we also have to be cognizant that the cell tower or the people that are doing this can't just walk in and say, we're going to put one in Skunk Hollow. The township has to actually contract and enter into agreement, i.e. any landowner in the AC or the Agricultural Conservation District has to do the same thing. So it's also the landowner that has to go into there. So I would hope, I can't speak, for our commissioners, but I would hope that our commissioners would not put a cell tower behind the Willows Mansion or something to that effect. So again, I think that's part of what we have to look at when, you can't restrict fully by ordinance because you do have to afford landowners their rights as property owners. We can only hope that they do the right thing and don't want to put a cell tower in certain areas that would affect the views in the beautiful area that we live in. Is there any other comments from the commission?
Quick question. The Telecommunications Act of 1996, is it still the same act, has been modified or amended since 96?
There have been operational amendments since it was enacted, but it's essentially in substance, it's in these areas, it's the same law.
Okay.
The act is much broader than wireless communication facilities. It covers cable, it covers television, it covers all sorts of other areas. But in the area that we're looking at this evening, there haven't been enormous substantive amendments to that act.
Thanks.
Anything else?
I don't understand what the Delco issue number 2 and number 3 were. I don't understand how they were resolved or whether we need to do something or we need to evaluate their position. So could you just summarize what their issue was and whether their change made it into your draft?
Yeah, no, that's a good idea to go back because there will have to be some changes to the proposed amendment to incorporate revisions responsive to the Delaware County Planning Commission.
Well, we don't have to incorporate them, right? This is just for us to decide.
Mm-hmm.
Well, frankly, I read their approval as conditional and conditioned on making a few of these changes. Now, if I misread that, I'm happy to be disabused of that. But and again, I'm sorry that you don't have the. Excuse me. Well, I'm not even confused by it. Basically, under the recommendations section, let me see if I can call that up on this. Their recommendations for approval of the. Hold on, bear with me. Approval of the proposed amendments is contingent upon incorporating certain of their changes. So we do, in fact, need to respond to certain of the comments that the planning department had.
Excuse me for interrupting. Yeah. Mark, is that accurate? I mean, they're an advisory board, correct?
They're an advisory board.
So it's just a recommendation. It has we can accept it or not accept it. There's no.
I believe that's the case. Obviously, you always want to have the Delaware County Planning Department on your side, and
so I'd just like to hear sort of the substance of it, and then decide whether I think they're right.
Sure, and again, in terms of the process, I don't know whether the absence of an approval from Delaware County is a non-starter, or whether we're willing to proceed without that approval. But all I'm suggesting is that their approval is contingent upon addressing certain of their comments.
There's some, just let me jump in, I'm sorry.
Sure, sorry.
I mean, there's many times they recommend denial and we still approve a land development application. So
okay.
it is a recommendation.
Right.
It is not required for us to comply with their requirements.
Okay, thanks. Excuse me. Their first comment addresses,
The first one we discussed, and that was the uncertainty of who has final
right,
approval.
okay, that's right.
So the second and the third we didn't discuss.
The second one merely noted that we added plan institutional for,
Can you jump up to one page?
oh, I'm sorry. Jeez, there I go again.
So what's the condition if they just merely note something?
No, that was simply an observation.
Okay.
That wasn't even a recommendation.
So number 2 is just an observation.
Number 2 is an observation. Number 3 is a recommendation that we clarify the issue of whether 164A is by right or by special exception. You'll recall 164B is by special exception, and they raised the issue of whether we want to clarify whether it is by right or whether we would want to include a higher bar.
And so what's the answer to that? What's your thought?
I'm frankly indifferent as it relates to that because that's a policy decision. You know, I to the extent that we're talking about outside the right of way, it's you guys, it's zoning hearing, it's and you know, obviously ultimately the board, but I would think that since we're not talking about the same sort of structures as we are in 164B, which is again the monopoles, the large towers, perhaps a lower bar is appropriate, but I don't want to. You know,
So as it is now,
we,
is it by right as it is now?
I mean, my personal reading of it, and this is my personal opinion on it, is that A is a by right.
Right.
As of right, if you are in one of those and you comply with this, you're as of right by, for lack of better terms, a building permit. B puts you into special exception. And that was going to be one of my comments, which didn't, E, the alternative locations for wireless communications, really doesn't have a review entity. It's not the township or approval of the township. It's just applicants shall be required to submit this information along with their application. Evidence submitted may consist of the following, but it doesn't actually put the applicant into whether he's special exception, whether it's before the Board of Supervisors, which I imagine that's where we would do, which would be the Radnor Township.
well, and again, you know, E is talking about 164B applications. So to the extent that you've already funneled them through to zoning hearing,
E wouldn't necessarily.
well,
When you have a 16, when you
well, the
number
lead into E says alternative location for wireless communication. Well, no, I'm sorry, you're right, because it doesn't
specify.
No, yeah, I understand. Yeah, there's a vacuum there.
I read
Well-
it to apply to B. I don't know if that resolves your issue, Mark, but
Yeah,
Julia, is that the way you read it too?
Again, I guess to the extent that E is talking about alternative locations for wireless communications facilities with
Support
support
structures,
structures.
which is
their
a
towers, their
sub-
monopoles. That's 164B.
That's the first line in 164.
Then everything else relates strictly to support structures.
And the definition of support structure excludes a tent.
Right, and also, just as importantly, it's a structure that's designed specifically to support. It's not slapping an antenna on the side of an apartment building or you know, something like that.
It seems as though it would come under the auspices of section B, but do we need to make it clear so people don't have to go through what we just went through?
Well,
to figure that out?
that's actually what I was just thinking. I think there probably needs to be, obviously, they've imposed additional conditions. but we should put, or it should be clarified as to where this evidence is being submitted. Is this going to the zoning hearing board also, or is this actually going to the, when it's not, when alternative locations do arise and it's not within B, then where does it there has to be some governing body that signs off on that, and what governing body signs off on that?
And not to put too fine a point on it, the argument could be made that they could be able to make their case to the Board of Commissioners, notwithstanding any presentation that they made to the zoning hearing board for that. But you're right. I would think in the first instance, you would have to make that showing to the body that first gets the application. So that would be zoning hearing. There's certainly no harm in clarifying that in the language.
Well, the problem with that, the zoning hearing board is a special exception. The zoning hearing board kicks in only to the areas located AC.
But only zoning hearing board gets towers. Towers go to zoning hearing as a
special exception
Well, then in
under B.
164A, what's the definition of support structure? Where you've added the language, be erected only on attachment structures or support structures.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So now it is in A also. So it is confusing.
But I guess my point is, when you're looking at zoning, you're getting a special exception from the zoning districts AC, PLO, PLU, and PI. What if under E, I'm just going to say this, it goes into R1? Or what if it does go into one of the other ones that isn't, then you're not seeking a special exception under that zoning district. That's why I think we need to clarify where, even though this, again, and I should clarify, this is not your doing, this is the way the code was. But if we have the code, we might as well clarify something like that. I mean, that you did not draft this. This has been absent and has been absent for a long time in our in this wireless code. So it's not something that we're throwing this on you.
No. And you can read it more than one way, which obviously the ambiguity is what's causing the discussion.
Exactly.
But, one side of the argument would clearly be that if it's a support structure, regardless of where you're putting it, you're limited to certain locations, and then that eliminates the R1 issue. But another side could be argued. So I hear what you're saying. But getting back to the earlier question though about support structures in A. We might need to look at that. I think that was unintentionally imprecise. How's that?
Is that intended to mean other existing buildings and structures in the general sense of the word structures?
Well, it could address co-location.
Okay.
As opposed to new construction.
Are you talking about the
inclusion of language support structure? I'm sorry.
In 280-164A,
correct.
Erected only on attachment structures or support structures. So or correct. Support structures is the three
right.
words that were
right. And frankly, perhaps the clarification is existing support structures.
So you want to allow this to include a situation where you have an existing tower somewhere, and you're allowing for an attachment of additional WCFs to that existing tower.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because there is an overlap between 164A and 164B in terms of zoning class, zoning
yes.
Districts.
And if you use the word existing.
Yeah, I think if we make clear that we're not talking about the construction of a new facility. We're talking about a co-location circumstance, and we're talking about attaching to an existing support structure.
So what's the language change that you would recommend?
Be erected only on attachment structures or existing support structures, which are at least 60 feet, yada, 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 of the height, and then after the parenthetical with the 40%, of the height of the attachment structure or existing support structure. I mean, because the way attachment structure is defined, it's implicit that that's already existing. I mean, the building you're affixing a an antenna to is already standing. But if we make clear that the usage in 164A relates only to existing support structures, does that address?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, comments? Okay. I want to open the mic to public comment. If you want to turn off your.
All right, I was going to, okay, is it clear what the process is? Or what our process flow is? I received a letter, which I gave to all of you guys, all of you ladies and gentlemen, forgive me, that indicated that on a couple of occasions it didn't necessarily have a clear process. Now, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what's going on here, but have we figured out what our flow is going to be?
Well, I think ultimately, I don't want to. I think my sense of our discussions this evening is that one of the things you're going to talk about when it comes time is whether a process should be formalized. And again, I mean, we'd be fine with that, and there's certainly more benefit than harm, I think, to that, since it, as you note, it is a little ambiguous right now. But I think that's something that my understanding was you all were going to be chatting about. Okay, let me turn this thing off here.
Mr. Barker,
I just make a comment.
real quick. Okay.
I'd just like to acknowledge all the work that was done by the subcommittee to put this together. They put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we appreciate it.
I would agree, and
Thank
I thank you. I thank every one of them.
Hi, Rick Barker, 920 Lewis Lane. Mark, I noticed you have a zoning map. Could you just verify for me that Chetman, i.e. Radnor House, is R5, or is it?
I will double check it.
Because it's not conforming for R5. I mean, we have Dan just left. I think we have a plan.
It is R5. I believe
we also
it.
do have a planned department zoning classification, I think.
According to my zoning map, and this is updated December 12th, 2006, produced by Radnor Township, the Radnor House area, which is, and the reason I'm picking this off, it's adjacent to Tunnel Park, right, Tunnel,
yeah.
is all R5. Now, it might be an existing nonconformity, but it is,
okay.
right now, that is the zoning district R5.
Again, you might remember at the last planning meeting when this was discussed, I thought that it was important to clarify why R5 was one of these districts. And the gentleman from the Cable Council, I'm sorry, I forget your name. Mr. Riley, thank you, Mr. Riley, for all your efforts. Related that this was to accommodate the existing telephone towers that are there, which of course is an important consideration. However, and I do think it's very important that you add this existing support structure, because this is very confusing, because you have an attached, and attached by definition doesn't involve a support structure, and then you have the B, which involves support structure. So you, again, by putting the word support structure in that, it does kind of muddy the waters a little bit. And just to also point out, I mean, I encourage the committee to look at this A again, because you could end up with a situation, if you look at the definition of attached wireless communication facility, it says, along with any device which attaches the antenna array to the existing building, i.e. it could be a tower. So you could end up, if you interpret this literally, an R5 residence could end up with a 120-foot tower on top of it. Mm. 120, thank you. Thank you for correcting my misspeaking. So again, this A seems confusing to me, and if in fact you're trying to accommodate the existing tower in this non-conforming property, I think you have to be very careful, because you might end up again with unintended consequences. And I can see here how, at least if I'm reading it correctly, it's very possible that you could have a device that attaches it to an R5 building that could, in fact, go up to 120 feet. And I don't think that's the intention of this committee or the Cable Council. And also to point out that C2 and C3 are both limited to 35 feet. And 40% of that is 14 feet. So you're talking about enabling a 49-foot tower, which already has been determined, at the borderline of adequacy. So it seems like these zoning classifications, R5, C2, and C3, were sort of grandfathered into this new amended A. And consideration should be how to properly accommodate them, because perhaps they should be removed. Perhaps they should be put into the B. I think this A needs some work, or the definition of attached wireless communication facility needs some work. I would encourage not using the language support structure, because again, it's confusing, because A is supposed to talk about attached, and if you look at the definition of attached, it's a facility that doesn't involve a support structure.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. I'd like to get some clarification, because I believe I heard the gentleman say that right now the surrounding residents to a proposed tower would not have to be notified. And I know this came up at one of the recent Board of Commissioners meeting when they were proposing taking what's called a supporting telephone pole, which was 35 feet, and they wanted to make it 75 feet. And the commissioners said, has anybody in that area been notified? And they were told no. And so their comment at the time was, well, whoever owns that pole, so to speak, in front of his house is going to be a little upset when it goes from 35 feet to 75 feet. So I would like to see in this somewhere some sort of process of where the public is notified. If it's going to zoning, they're going to be notified. But you'd be pretty upset if the telephone in front of your house suddenly doubled in size and you weren't notified that that was going to happen. Doug spoke about the right-of-way and it being in your right-of-way, but I think in terms of transparency, particularly in this township right now, something should be codified about how the surrounding area is notified. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just respond to that particular point. We, as a matter of policy, do ask that question of applicants that come before us. Somewhat toothless, I will admit, because it's not a required hoop that they need to jump through. But the specific pole that was referred to earlier on Bryn Mawr Avenue near Malin, and other applications that we have seen, we have asked that question as to whether surrounding property owners have notice of the application. In some instances, they have been notified. In others, they have not. But currently, as it stands, there's no requirement that notice be given. So if some examination of process is undertaken, I think one area that certainly I believe deserves attention is looking at the issue of notice, because it's a well-made point that a 70-foot telephone pole is somewhat off-putting, and affected landowners are going to want to know about
it. Forgive me, but I forgot to add also, A does seem to be the, particularly with the R5 in there, the one that would potentially be more worthy of a review. And right now, Mark, I agree with you. I don't think this has any zoning hearing board or, frankly, any citizen communication council review, or that matter, it's unclear as whether to have any planning review. This is a by right. So I would encourage you to put some sort of review step, into the A, and also Likewise, perhaps into the outside of the right-of-way. For instance, it was brought up earlier that the Communication Council reviews the facilities within the right-of-way, and the facilities outside of the right-of-way, again, seem to me to be ones that, at least potentially, are worthy of greater degree of scrutiny because of the potential impact they might have, for instance, on residential areas, et cetera. So I would recommend the committee consider special exception. And again, we talked about process. Certainly the Communication Council. Thanks again.
Is there anyone else? Before I open up back to the Planning Commission, I look over and Dan's not there. Sue, do you know, is this scheduled to go before the commissioners? Has there been a public hearing slated yet for this for the commissioners, or what is our time frame on this? Do you have any idea? Or Tom, do you know what the?
I don't know. I think it would be appropriate for you to consider it. And I'm Art Hartel. I'm vice chairman of the cable, and I was on the subcommittee. There are a number of process issues that were raised tonight which we did not treat because it was outside the scope of what we were asked to do. But it's obvious that those process issues need to be dealt with. We'd be very happy to work alongside you to create the process which you feel is necessary and appropriate for the township in addressing the areas that have been both raised by the citizens and your own panel. So I think that's more appropriate than trying to force legislation through to get it right as we go forward.
I appreciate that, Art, and that's what I was going to suggest is basically, I was going to suggest that we not make a formal recommendation tonight, obviously, to the supervisors, but that we give you feedback on the different areas. I've noted some. I know that Don's been taking notes, so that we won't have a formal motion on this, but we will go over specifically certain areas that we'd like to see clarified. Maybe we can add language that we like at this point in time, and then you take it back and then come back to us next month if next month is fine. And I also want to, again, to Tom, I do thank everyone for all of the work they've done on this in the subcommittee. I know you guys have worked hard, and I know that, when you kind of say, oh boy, we're going back to committee, but we want to do it right, and we want to do it right the first time. And, that's why we're here. We're sitting up here reviewing it and taking our time to make sure it's right and to make sure this township is protected appropriately.
Yeah, no, and I certainly concur with that. And just to speak to scheduling, it was certainly the subcommittee's understanding that until a recommendation for the proposed amendments would be made by this group, nothing would be put on the Board of Commissioners calendar. So we're here. We're here to make the changes that are needed, and then we can let that schedule take its course. But certainly, at this point, we're ready to work with you to do what we need to do.
Very good. Thank you. With that, I'll open it up to the commission. I don't know if, I've been taking notes and Don has been taking notes. Don, do you want to spearhead just kind of the recommendations? And then after he's done, Doug, Steve, Matt,
what I'll do. I identified 10 issues. 4 of them I think are resolved and don't require further discussion or input. And then there's 6 that require more information. So the first was the issue that you identified with 164A. And the specific numbers, like that's the main substance of the change. The numbers seem reasonable to me. I don't know if anyone wants to change the numbers, but I have no input on changing them one way or another, so they seem reasonable to me.
What numbers?
That's the
60-foot minimum, the 120-foot maximum, 40%. And I don't have, and I will add to that, just to kind of add to what Rick said. The numbers to make sure that I don't have a problem with the numbers, and I don't, want to speak for the rest of the board on this, but to make sure that they are that the language in 164A altogether doesn't allow someone to build a 60-foot tower on top of his 2-story residential home. Just so there isn't. I can see it's, we need to work on the language in there, but okay.
I also have no issue with adding PPI in 164B.
PI.
PI, excuse me. I don't know what I was. And then as far as whether, as a policy issue, we would want to gravitate towards small poles or large poles, I don't know what the answer is. I would think there's advantages to having, some people would want a smaller number of large poles, which the providers can co-locate, so I don't know that we want to push them towards 60 foot. I'm comfortable with the range and sort of let the political process push them in a certain direction. So I wouldn't pursue any further action on that one. And then also, I think the 3 Delaware County planning issues are all resolved. I don't see the ambiguity that they see in A, and the other 2 was, one was just an observation, so I don't think there's any further action there. So I have 6 that require further input. One is for 280-164, there should be some kind of review step. So identify where that review step should occur, and then recommend to us whether it's special exception or whether it's the Citizens Communication Council, but identify the best place for that review.
Are we going to have more than one review? Like both of those things?
I mean, I think that remains to be seen.
I think I believe, and again, you can check with the FCC council, I believe you do need to provide some sort of as of right, or else you're going to be considered you're taking a use away. So there's going to have to be some as of right provisions in that 164A where you can't send a special exception. You actually have to, I believe you're going to have to, and again, please check. But that doesn't mean that it can't be subject to notice to the neighbors and also subject to a review by the Citizens Council. So, I mean, I think that that's a good step there, but I do believe that legally you do need, and again, please have that, your council check on that you do have to have some as of right. You just can't lock them out and say, no, you got to jump through hoops every time you go through it. I might be wrong, been wrong before.
Now, with respect to that, is it possible to, again, I'm not talking specifically about heights, but if, we're talking about 120-foot tower or something, do we say that up to 60 foot or 70 foot, you do it by right, and above that, you may have to go through these processes where is it possible to set the ordinance up that way, or is that, we're out of luck?
Yeah, I don't know of any limitation that would preclude doing it that way. But again, it's a somewhat slippery area, and we'd want to make sure that private landowners' rights aren't being unduly limited by that. But I know of no reason why we couldn't make it a step procedure, if you will, up to a certain height, and then above that, some other procedure.
As long as we're not prohibiting service, essentially.
Correct.
So at this point, can we just sort of keep it conceptual, where what we're looking for is a review step, and come back and tell us where you think the best review step is?
Yeah, and we'll certainly do that. We have no problem with that. To the extent that it's a sort of a larger, more global policy issue, this is one voice in a much larger group, and others might have different opinions as to the best way to do it. But we will certainly bring to you what our thinking is on it, and then whether that's ultimately where we go, we'll see what happens.
The second item is max height for in the right-of-way. So find out if we have the authority, and then come back with recommendations for. I mean, is that something that, to me, it seems very reasonable that we should be doing that. So
I agree.
So just proceed under the assumption that if we have the authority to regulate the height for in the right-of-way, that we do want numeric limits on that. Number 3 is Mark's 164E, just changing the or to and. Number 4 is 164E, clarify the location of the approving authority. Did I word that correctly, Mark? Is that?
Clarify what governing body
yes.
approves.
What governing body?
In E. Whether it does go special exception, or just clarify that in the E.
Number 5 is 164A, to clarify the issue with the term supporting structure, and whether that needs to include existing supporting structure or some other change, but clarify the issue that we discussed tonight. And then number 6 is to identify appropriate notification procedures.
So we're comfortable with the concept of a minimum and a maximum, but do we need the council to go back and tell us if that is the current, whatever you want to call it, market standard? Is 60 to 120? Sure sounds reasonable, but if you...
Yeah. I think it's a good idea, Ed.
Yeah, can we check on that also?
So add that as number 7, which would be to
Verify or
yeah,
justify
sort of
60 to 120?
support the numbers that were chosen for 164A. Is that it?
Yeah. Thanks, Don.
I would also, I mean, again, I've talked with a couple of different people over the trends in the industry, but they're just particular individuals. Is there in fact a trend in the industry moving in one direction or the other, like larger cells or smaller or whatever else? Is that possible to find that out, or is that pie in the sky stuff?
I think we can make a general inquiry to carriers. We certainly know what we've seen come before us, and it has been smaller rather than larger, but we're happy to dig a little to see if that's the rule rather than the exception.
It would just be interesting to know if in fact there's really a trend in that direction.
I think,
I've
Doug,
heard
we
it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Okay.
I think, Doug, we need to, be sure that when the ordinance amendments go through, that they're going to protect us no matter where the trends go. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's good to know what's coming, and that's great, but a trend isn't a promise, and we want to write this in a way that no matter what happens, we'll be ready.
Yeah, the real trick is writing it for technologies that don't exist yet. Tom left. That was Tom's assignment, but that's the real trick. And we can't do that, and we'll take that as it comes. But we'll try our best.
Well, it brings up an interesting point. Who was the group that decided this was the time to review this? What led up to this review at this point? The supervisors just decided now is the time? Was there something that happened in the technology world?
I think we saw a number of similar, my understanding is that the statute or the code's been in effect for about 10 years without any significant change. We want to keep up with trends. We've seen pole top applications increase, and one of the issues was whether those types of applications were adequately covered in the code. And I think by and large we've made the decision that they have. I mean, there are things that we can do to improve the process and improve the requirements, but I think it was time to do something. It'd been 10 years. This iPhone didn't exist 10 years ago, and the code was put into place 10 years ago. And I think there was just a general sense that we've got to catch up or at least stay as current as we can without a wholesale overhaul of the code.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else on the commission have anything?
One other thing I had at the very end, in 28166H and 2166I, you had put about putting fences 10 feet around any place where you have a station, but if that happens to be a telephone pole, you're going to have this phone pole in the middle of maybe you just want to look at the language just a tiny bit. And the same thing with the next one down, which is planting trees around it. It's sort of it's almost like a typo kind of thing. 166H.
Yeah, I see that. The lead-in language for that section talks about applicants shall meet the requirements of this section and provide the following information where applicable. Now, if 5 feet of that fence was going to be in the middle of Sproul Road, yeah, we have an issue. But I hear what you're saying. But I think the where applicable language implies that where the proposal is such that it contemplates a fence as opposed to something else, that be taken into account.
Does anyone else have anything? I just have two clarifications. First off, on the one thing about secondary use versus accessory use, I do prefer accessory use. I don't know how the rest of the planning commission feels about that. Secondary use is a little bit ambiguous. With regard to, I would like to see the Citizens Communication Council review all applications, even the ones through 164B. Even though they're going to special exception zoning, I'd like to see them review all. And I think that's in what everyone else has been feeling here. And again, when you're looking through the different, when we talked about 164E and the governing body, again, throughout the process and getting to the process and taking, the public's awareness, especially because, these days, cell tower is a dirty word. Cell tower, no one wants them in their backyard, and it throws up. And we need to make sure that our public is made aware of any applications coming through. So to the extent we can, I think there should be public notice to any applications coming before the Communication Council and for applications that are coming for that, to the extent allowed. I mean, if it's an absolute by right, I don't know what notice is going to do, but we can see it's still give it. And the only thing that I do disagree with Don on is I actually am not in favor of the PI in the 164B. The adding of the PI, and I guess I would need to get the sentiment of the commission on that, because I just, I'm one person, and does anyone have any, just as an informal tally?
Sure. I mean, it makes sense to me because it's likely to have a tall building, isn't it? So.
Well, 164B allows towers. That's why I think that 164A allows the Villanova universities, the Cabrini colleges, the institutions in this area that have taller buildings within them to put the cell tower on. When you incorporate 164B is strictly a tower, it allows Villanova University to go put a tower on their campus. And I don't think that they should have to be able to put a tower on their campus, any institution here.
Okay, so because you want them to, you think it's better to put it on the building.
I think it's
if
better.
If you have the building, then
if you have the building,
don't,
put them on. I'd rather see wireless communication facilities go on buildings than on a tower in the middle of a beautiful campus or something along those lines. It's just my opinion. So that's why I would say to keep PI out of the 164B. Steve, Matt? Okay.
Yeah. Which raises the question of whether we need to do something about the Wayne Business Overlay District, which is not included in either of these. Is that a? I'm somewhat but not completely conversant on how that district works, but is that a district that we need to specifically provide for in either 164A or B?
How do you address that with AT&T? I mean, isn't there an existing precedent there that's been there for 20?
Yeah, but now
it's,
I mean,
if 28170 though, Mark?
And I'm not sure, and that's something we should look into, and I really don't know the answer, but I know, I'm not sure if it was addressed in the WBOD. I'm really not sure if it even speaks of wireless communication, so therefore this would go into there. The AT&T building, or whatever it's called now, it's an existing non-conforming use. It is what it is, and until it comes down to the ground, we've got no control to govern it, except for, I guess we could, once this goes into place, you're right, the existing structures goes into place. So it could have an
thought
effect.
it was, perhaps I misunderstand the issue, but I thought it was addressed in 28170. Which is pre-existing facilities. So.
Well, I wasn't so much focusing on existing uses. I'm sort of looking prospectively. Yeah. Once whatever amendments end up being enacted, if they are, take effect.
So how does it stand
right now? It doesn't.
If a provider wants to come in and add
right.
cell phone service facilities in the Wayne Business District.
Right now, it's
not in these zoning categories. But I would think they should be allowed to put attached facilities in. I mean, it's certainly one of the most, built-up areas of the township, and that's where you're going to need service.
Would they, Wayne Presbyterian Church is in there, and they've got a steeple. They could certainly put it on that. What about the Wayne Methodist Church? Is that within it? Or is that just outside?
Any of the tall buildings in Wayne
Oh, yeah.
Well,
might be suitable for an attached
But
system, but we're not, it's not addressed here, is that the question?
Right,
And how should it
that
be
was my
addressed?
point, whether we needed, whether you consider it necessary to do something there, or, I mean, I'm not aware of gaps in coverage in that area, so maybe it's,
What happens today if AT&T wants to put a ancillary structure or attach a fixture to that building? I mean, they don't have to go before any type of, your advisory board. I'm assuming they just do it by right.
with respect to that particular case, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what they do. I know they do something.
Well, the only thing I could see is maybe being a benefit to addressing it is that we don't have fixtures up and down the face of that building over time. So well, when it's already, but or maybe some limitations as to how many fixtures they can attach.
Or build another one. What stops them from building another one if we don't address it now? Big parking lot on either side of that building.
Yeah, but they'd never be able to build that. It's a 35 or 40 foot, what's the height restriction now? They'd never be able to build that building again, that height. And then they wouldn't meet the 60-foot minimum requirement.
How about just a tower? How about just a
tower.
Just a
though.
tower.
It doesn't fall through as a building, does it?
Well, the tower is addressed in here under, if it's a separate tower, it would have to be under B, and it can only be in agricultural conservation, PLO and PLU, so it's not in, so it doesn't fall within. I'd have to look at the overlay district. I'd be curious, I don't know if you've reviewed it really quickly or not, but I don't know whether they actually discuss wireless facilities in there, whether that
I
was.
didn't take a look at that section.
That's something we should probably look at, and there's, without actually seeing that in front of us, I don't think we're going to be able to.
Yeah.
Well, can we just add that
It
to the list
doesn't.
as a
Yeah,
next item?
I think you need to review that. Let's take a look at, and we'll look at it on our side and take a
Well,
look at it.
at least in a cursory review, it doesn't say anything about it.
Okay, okay.
That doesn't mean I'm reading it right, but it doesn't appear
Okay.
to.
Yeah, I'm not sure any of the zoning classifications talk about wireless. I
Exactly.
think that's why the wireless code is, appended to everything that was already in place. So.
Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Any other questions that you might have? You have your mission now. But I do thank you for everything that you've done. Yes?
Sorry, Mark, the subject came up of how many. I have such a good social life that I end up watching Channel 30 on Saturday nights. And I watched the Design Review Board, and they were taking down 4 hoo-hoos on the top of, it's Chetwynd to me too, and putting up 7. And the Design Review Board said, is there any way to limit the number on this building, or is it going to look like a pincushion? And the answer to them was, well, gee, we don't know. I know there were 2 people from Radnor House here who came and then they left, because they're very concerned, as I understand what they're saying, something's going up on the roof, and then they're running cables down the side of the building and into the building, and that's where the work is. And they're very concerned about the number of, I'm going to call them appendages, that are up on this roof. And if you go to Emlyn Tinnell Field and you look at that building now, it is unbelievable how much is on there. So I think the question is going to come up at some point. How much is too much? And when can you modify it? I don't want to use the word stop, but
Well, again, I think within
there's
your,
questions being asked.
and I think that can be addressed within this, and I think that they're charged to look at that. Thank you. Okay. Next agenda item is old business. Does any planning commission have any old business? Next is new business. Next is adjournment. I think we'd all be happy to do that.
So moved.
Thank you.